There are combat zones where troops dread the opposition, and then there are combat zones where troops dread the location itself. Pokrovsk has transformed into something entirely different. A strange accursed square on the landscape where Russian forces arrive in massive quantities and then halt. Not withdraw, not reposition, just stop. As though the urban center is expelling them. What's unfolding here feels otherworldly, nearly impossible to rationalize. Russian fighters are declining to engage. They're inflicting wounds upon themselves. They are pleading to be shipped to detention. And when none of those options succeed, they simply disappear. This is not messaging. This is not guesswork. This is what is genuinely occurring within one of the most intense conflict areas on the surface of the planet currently. Greetings. You are tuned into Bradley Madden, and today we are diving into the Pokrovsk phenomenon. If you haven't joined yet, now is the ideal moment. Press that subscribe icon and activate notifications because what we are about to share is one of the most remarkable military accounts of this entire conflict, and we are going to examine every element of it. Let's place ourselves in the position of a Russian fighter for a second. When you enlisted, you were filled with optimism. Become a true warrior, Putin's messaging assured you. Receive massive sums of payment while serving. Depending on where you were conscripted, the incentive you obtained for signing your agreement was greater than you would have earned in a complete year of ordinary employment. Over $26,000 in certain areas. You couldn't agree quickly enough. After all, Russia would need to invest time preparing you, sustaining you, and even after you were dispatched to Ukraine, you would be positioned far behind the active lines. The experienced troops would manage the combat, and you'd spend most of your days understanding the basics. Perhaps you wouldn't even be required. Putin had informed the globe that Pokrovsk had already crumbled beneath Russia's power, and the capture of all of Donetsk from that stage was barely more than a technicality. But right from the instant you placed your signature on the agreement form, something seemed wrong. You inquired about preparation and received no responses. You were instructed to board a vehicle and stay quiet. For a week, you journeyed, apparently passing by every installation where fighters are meant to discover how to function as fighters. After the third or fourth day, it struck you. You are not going to receive preparation whatsoever. You are proceeding directly to the lines, and you are being dispatched to Pokrovsk. Fine, you reason Pokrovsk has been captured. I'll serve in the support zone while the seasoned fighters advance onward. But when you eventually reach the periphery, because approaching any nearer than that seems fatal, that's when you comprehend something is deeply, deeply amiss. You glance around and notice the tormented expressions of your fellow soldiers. You search for rations and discover there are none. Rations and no treatment facilities, no protection. At one moment, a drone passes above, and you consider yourself fortunate it's a Russian drone carrying supplies, and not one of the Ukrainian aerial nightmares you've been told so much regarding. But that only generates additional concerns. Why drones? Why not protected transports? What exactly has occurred with supply chains here? That's when you begin catching murmurs about the Pokrovsk phenomenon. The urban center is nowhere near being under Russian authority. As one of your gaunt-looking and petrified fellow soldiers informs you, fighters are dispatched to Pokrovsk and they are never spotted afterward. Something within that urban center is consuming Russia's troops like nothing anybody has previously witnessed. Then your fellow soldier confides with a small revelation. He is planning to flee. And if you're wise, you follow suit. This is the account of what is actually occurring to Russia's fighters as they are compelled to storm a city that refuses to surrender. This is the Pokrovsk phenomenon, and it is extremely, extremely genuine. Back in December, reporter Jason J. Smart consulted with former Navy SEAL Team 6 Squadron Commander Chuck Farah about everything transpiring in the Pokrovsk corridor. Certainly, there is the enormous casualty total, which we'll address in several minutes. But more striking than everything else is the dramatic rise in the quantity of Russian fighters who are outright declining to engage. Many of those combatants are abandoning their weapons the instant they learn they're being directed into Pokrovsk. Self-inflicted harm has grown frequent among Russia's fighters in this region. As Smart disclosed from his period at the lines, One Ukrainian officer explained that the frequency at which Russian fighters are ending their own existence on the battlefield as soon as they are isolated from their squad or wounded is climbing by the day. Once wounded or separated, they seem to conclude that perishing is unavoidable, that something within Pokrovsk is going to reach them, that there is no way out. So, they reach the conclusion independently. This is what the Pokrovsk phenomenon does to a person's psyche. Others pursue less drastic options. According to Ukrainian media source UNN, fighters from Russia's 1,441st Motorized Rifle Regiment have discovered a method to escape what progressively appears like guaranteed fatality. Rather than advancing to the lines, they are injuring themselves to depart the combat area. The Atesh Resistance Network, which maintains a web of operatives inside Russian-controlled territory in support of Ukraine, has documented a notable surge of fighters with what it labels unusual injuries appearing at Russian military treatment centers in the Donetsk vicinity. These are not injuries from engagement. The fighters have acknowledged in confidential discussions with Atesh contacts at a Donetsk military treatment center that they are deliberately wounding themselves. The explanation: they are being commanded to charge positions without preparation, without gear, without provisions, and ordered to secure the objective at whatever expense. Those who attempt to decline are warned with imprisonment and deprived of their compensation. This is not a singular occurrence. In August, TVP World documented that fighters and commanders from Russia's 83rd Guards Air Assault Brigade were determined culpable of wounding each other. Russian officials who tried them stated the declared motivation was to obtain reimbursement for combat injuries. Those fighters extracted 200 million rubles, approximately $2.6 million, from the Russian armed forces before they were identified. Consider that for an instant. These individuals would prefer facing a Russian military tribunal than facing Pokrovsk. According to coverage from Kiev Post, the circumstances have become so dire that leaders of the 30th Separate Mechanized Brigade are currently reportedly concealing their actual casualty totals. After massive losses, the leadership is purposefully recording fighters eliminated in combat as missing without authorization. They are generating alternate rosters, inputting hundreds of identities while categorizing the fallen as runaways. As one attached analysis stated, fighters recognize that at any point they can be classified as deserters, even if they perished in engagement. That generates anxiety, hostility, a swift deterioration in spirit, and alongside it the breakdown of any lingering confidence in the leadership structure. Now, you might be curious, if conditions are this terrible, why don't fighters simply escape? Some do. Russia is confronting unprecedented abandonments, and many of those fleeing their posts are deliberately attempting to leave the Pokrovsk corridor. In September, United 24 Media indicated that roughly 70,000 of the 700,000 fighters Russia has deployed into Ukraine were anticipated to have deserted their station by the conclusion of 2025. Let's provide that some perspective. That indicates approximately 10% of Russia's total deployed strength simply departed. In the Pokrovsk area specifically, as many as 150,000 fighters have been assembled to capture a solitary city. Apply that identical abandonment percentage, and Russia is entering every offensive at 90% strength before a single round is discharged. But those who attempt to escape rapidly learn that Russia's leaders have planned for precisely that. Restraints have become a preferred instrument. As Smart documented, there are recordings of Russian fighters being conveyed to the lines while shackled to eliminate any possibility of abandonment. In January 2025, The Sun distributed footage allegedly showing personnel of the 15th Guards Motorized Brigade being ferried to the engagement zones while bodily constrained. And in a distinct occurrence recounted by Euromaidan Press, recordings depicted a Russian officer capturing two fighters who declined to enter Pokrovsk, one citing a health issue, the other displaying an injury. The officer was unaffected. He documented them to revoke their compensation and warned to reassign them to a punishment squad from which they would be driven into Pokrovsk under threat of force. Indeed, punishment formations. That is what it has reached. Individuals who decline to perish are being converted into human detection tools, deployed first to attract Ukrainian shots and expose defensive locations. And for those who don't wind up shackled or in punishment formations, there is something even grimmer awaiting. In October, the Telegraph covered disturbing footage from the Lyman area of Donetsk north of Pokrovsk depicting Russian fighters who had been chained to trees and abandoned to expire. It was Ukraine that located them, not as detainees, not as victims of engagement. These 4 fighters had been forsaken by their own leaders, left without sustenance, without hydration, unable to relocate because they had declined to advance forward after their complete squad was eliminated during an offensive. If this is what's transpiring on the Lyman sector, one can only speculate what confronts those who resist in Pokrovsk. Ensure you're following Bradley Madden. We are only beginning, and what follows next is the segment of the Pokrovsk account that nobody, not even Russia's own fighters, completely grasps until it is much too late. Now, let's discuss General Winter, because there is something eliminating Russia's fighters in Pokrovsk that has absolutely nothing to do with Ukraine whatsoever. Picture once more that you are that Russian fighter. You didn't heed your comrades' counsel. You didn't escape. The individual who cautioned you is now shackled to a tree you walk past every morning. And everything surrounding you, the debris, the devastation, the skeletal structures of edifices, is blanketed in a spectral pale snow that you understand renders you a visible mark. Your own thermal signature is a signal. The freeze itself is an instrument. As Chuck Farrer explained, referencing his background in the commandos, there is a basic principle. You can survive 3 minutes lacking oxygen, 3 days lacking hydration, but merely 3 hours lacking protection. And Russia's fighters trying to storm Pokrovsk are operating in conditions that frequently drop as far as -10 degrees Celsius, roughly 14 degrees Fahrenheit, with gusts reaching 30 knots in certain zones. Your fingers go lifeless, you can't squeeze your weapon, your feet go lifeless, and you can't detect them. They cease aching, but the following dawn your digits are falling apart. Farrer stated Russian fighters, many of whom showed up without adequate winter equipment, are effectively being ravaged by the surroundings. No protection, no assistance, no withdrawal, just the freeze, the gusts, the snowfall, and the unmanned aircraft. Because it is the unmanned aircraft that have arguably served the greatest function in transforming Pokrovsk into the accursed territory it has turned into. According to United 24 Media, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky declared in December that 25,000 Russian fighters were eliminated by Ukraine in October solely. And all of them were eliminated by unmanned aircraft. Not cannons, not aerial bombardments, unmanned aircraft. And these unmanned aircraft are capturing everything. They are documenting their engagements, enabling Ukraine to confirm precisely what its controllers are accomplishing. Russia's fighters are being recorded on the most unfiltered of lenses in their closing instance, and there is nothing they can accomplish regarding it. Knowledge of this circulates. Every fighter who endures long enough to recount the experience brings with him the awareness of what these machines accomplish, how they register, how they materialize just before everything concludes. That awareness generates terror more rapidly than any cannon volley. Here's where it grows genuinely extraordinary. Ukraine has modified its strategy toward Pokrovsk in manners that even seasoned military scholars find remarkable. As documented by Euromaidan Press, the urban engagement within Pokrovsk has developed into what frontline witnesses are labeling a conflict of phantoms. The large-scale offensives of the war's initial years are finished. In their stead, a distributed struggle waged by compact, nearly independent squads on both fronts. The Russians deploy micro-formations of infiltrators. 2 or 3 soldiers creeping through wreckage, concealing in cellars, searching for Ukrainian fortified positions. The Ukrainians counter them with their own spectral sweeps. Scouting teams operating in duos or trios, each directed by an unmanned craft with heat detection, each fighter bearing portable signal disruption devices. These sweeps are quiet, agile, and deadly. A confrontation might include no greater than a small number of combatants on each front confined to a single road, one compound, one demolished residential structure. But for the Russians being tracked by those sweeps, it resembles battling an apparition. An apparition equipped with an unmanned craft that can detect through structures in the blackness. This emerging style of metropolitan combat rewards expertise, vigilance, and resilience above everything else. And for Russian troops comprised of reluctant draftees, unprepared recruits, and punishment fighters, it is an unendurable destruction apparatus. Adding to all of this is the disastrous deficit of Russian protective vehicles. Tanks and shielded transports are in limited availability along the complete front, and Pokrovsk is no different. As both Smart and Farr have highlighted, Russia has been observed utilizing horses, mules, and even camels to move supplies and, in certain instances, to convert foot soldiers into mounted forces, as if this were a struggle from 100 years prior. The Moscow Times chronicled Russia's deployment of horses and mules in a March 2025 article, characterizing it as suggestive of a severe equipment shortfall for which draft animals have evidently become the sole accessible answer. Russia has sacrificed an estimated 50,000 protected vehicles since the beginning of the comprehensive assault. Ukraine's Ministry of Finance sets the number at above 11,600 tanks and approximately 24,000 armored combat vehicles. That totals over 35,000 pieces, an astonishing figure for what is expected to be one of the globe's most formidable armed forces. According to the Ukrainian General Staff, as of December 17, 2025, Russia had surrendered over 11,400 tanks, greater than 23,000 protected vehicles, 91,000 unmanned aircraft, and exceeding 1,190,000 aggregate personnel losses since February 2022. In Pokrovsk particularly, Al Jazeera has documented that Russia has forfeited greater than 1,000 protected vehicles and above 500 tanks in the Pokrovsk area exclusively since campaigns commenced in October 2023. That is not the wider conflict. That is one municipality, one area, one unrelenting mechanism. Farah recounted a particular event from December 22, 2024, when Russia initiated one of the biggest armored offensives observed in the Pokrovsk corridor in months. 5 tanks and 15 infantry combat vehicles advancing west along the M32 roadway. That formation was obliterated before it ever arrived at its target. Every vehicle shattered by Ukrainian unmanned aircraft and cannons long before Russian soldiers reached the terrain. What this implies is that Russia confronts an impossible predicament in Pokrovsk. When they possess protective vehicles, they become larger, more sluggish objectives for Ukraine's unmanned aircraft formations. When they lack protective vehicles, fighters must proceed on foot without backing into roads where every darkness might conceal a Ukrainian pursuit squad. As the Institute for the Study of War composed in a December 2025 evaluation, Russia's operation in Pokrovsk is being utilized as much for mental and governmental impact as for genuine military progress. George Barros, Russia team director at ISW, declared that Moscow is amplifying the capture of Pokrovsk to depict Russian progress as unstoppable to persuade both Kiev and Washington that continued opposition is meaningless. That storyline, Barros contended, is being repeated in certain quarters of the Trump administration's settlement planning groups, and Putin has been pleased to participate. In early December 2025, the Russian Defense Ministry released a recording purporting to depict Russian fighters hoisting the Russian banner over Pokrovsk downtown. Ukrainian troops immediately responded, indicating that the combatants who raised that banner had already been driven back. Ukrainian Commander-in-Chief Oleksandr Syrsky, as covered by the Kyiv Independent on December 17, proclaimed that Ukrainian troops had actually recovered 16 square kilometers of ground in the northern section of Pokrovsk and freed an additional 56 square kilometers surrounding the neighboring communities of Myrnarad. As Syrsky expressed, despite 17 months of Russian intensity, Ukrainian fighters continued to maintain their ground and capture the momentum. The Kremlin, as the Institute for the Study of War characterized it, has assembled what amounts to a fabricated narrative engineered to coerce the West into recognizing Russian territorial assertions as an accomplished reality. Military specialist Ivan Stupik, a former agent in Ukraine's SBU intelligence agency, told the Moscow Times that the declaration is about manufacturing a perception that Putin is commanding everything, a communication aimed at the American audience. The actuality on the battlefield presents a vastly different picture. The Russians presently outnumber the Ukrainians in this zone of operations somewhere between 10 and 15 to 1. Far indicated in December, and they are in practical terms no nearer to capturing Pokrovsk than they were last November. By late January 2026, little had shifted. According to United 24 Media, Russia is securing so minimal territory for such a monumental price that military scholars are comparing the pace of progression unfavorably to the deadliest engagements of World War I. Even the most catastrophic trench combat of 1914 to 1918 witnessed greater territorial acquisition per loss than what Russia is accomplishing in Pokrovsk currently. And then there is the conclusive devastating evidence that even Russia's own leaders have abandoned confidence in Pokrovsk. Rather than intensifying efforts, several Russian formations have dropped their Pokrovsk offensives completely, redirecting instead toward the adjacent city of Myrnorad. Farrer emphasized this transition, and Euromaidan Press validated on December 24, 2025, that Russia had gathered approximately 10 formations near Myrnorad seeking to locate a simpler penetration. What they encountered instead, Farrer observes, was merely a different iteration of the identical horror, exchanging one metropolitan three-dimensional combat environment for another. Because, as he articulated, it's difficult to overstate just how significantly a 3D engagement in a metropolitan zone absolutely benefits the protectors. Ukraine's Marines and airborne troops defending Myrnorad reported neutralizing or incapacitating 207 Russian combatants in the initial 3 weeks of December exclusively. That is one municipality. 3 weeks and 207 Russian combatants eliminated, and they were the individuals attempting to flee Pokrovsk. Let's revisit that Russian fighter one final time. You endured. You othered General Winter. You never entirely mustered the bravery to escape. And now you are inside Pokrovsk proper. Even without adequate preparation, you sense that this municipality is excessively silent. Every rush of breeze sends you whirling. Every few moments you detect the subtle hum of an unmanned craft above you, and you hope, sincerely hope that it hasn't targeted onto you. Eventually, you locate refuge. The destroyed husk of a structure that miraculously still possesses a ceiling. You dash inside. Your footwear crunches over shattered glass. You halt. You wish the noise didn't travel, but the humming intensifies, not diminishes. You are merely another casualty of the Pokrovsk phenomenon. If we deployed the 82nd Airborne Division entirely by themselves, Farrer remarked, I would anticipate them to consume that municipality rapidly like immediately. But these Russian troops, he continued, are essentially being worn down every single day. Russia forfeits 2 battalions of combatants every individual day somewhere on the Ukrainian combat zone. Approximately 40% of those losses, 400 individuals per day, are absorbed within the Pokrovsk sector exclusively. That's 400 human souls every 24 hours devoured by one municipality. The Pokrovsk phenomenon is not paranormal. There are no spirits. There is no sinister sorcery. What there is represents one of the most extraordinary accomplishments of protective innovation in contemporary military chronicles. Ukraine, outnumbered in certain areas by margins of 8 to 1 or greater, has engineered a destruction zone so efficient that it has mentally shattered a military far bigger than its own. Unmanned aircraft formations that perceive through snowfall and blackness. Pursuit squads that advance in stillness. A metropolitan combat zone where quantities signify nothing and proficiency signifies everything. And underlying all of that, the freeze, the starvation, the lack of reinforcement until the Pokrovsk phenomenon begins to seem remarkably like what it represents, a reflection raised to the genuine condition of Vladimir Putin's military apparatus. At the same time, the personal toll on the Ukrainian front cannot be overlooked. The Atlantic Council and Washington Times have both documented that Ukraine is experiencing its own personnel challenge, with Ukrainian President Zelensky candidly recognizing that his troops in the Pokrovsk vicinity are outmatched 8 to 1. Abandonment has become a predicament on both flanks of the barrier, though for distinctly different motivations. Ukrainian fighters abandon out of weariness, dissatisfaction with leadership, and the overwhelming burden of years of warfare. Russian fighters abandon because they sincerely think they are being dispatched to perish for nothing. One faction is battling for its native land. The other is battling for an incentive that no longer appears worthwhile. That is the authentic account of Pokrovsk. And it hasn't concluded. The engagement within that municipality persists as of this release. Ukrainian troops control the north. Russia asserts the south. Both factions comprehend that what transpires in Pokrovsk will determine the conditions of any ultimate discussion, the tempo of the larger conflict, and the closing section of Putin's catastrophic wager in Ukraine. If you wish to comprehend how severely Russia's speed of progress has genuinely deteriorated, not solely in Pokrovsk, but throughout every front of the conflict, we've released a comprehensive examination of the statistics and their significance. Navigate to Bradley Madden and view that recording. The statistics are remarkable. And if this recording provided you something to contemplate, follow Bradley Madden. Activate notifications. Forward this to someone who deserves to comprehend what is genuinely transpiring in this conflict. Beyond the titles, beyond the messaging, and beyond the haze of a struggle that the entire globe is observing, but few genuinely perceive. Thanks for viewing.